yoga philosophy, theology, yoga as a religion. What gives? What is it? These are videos that I'm recording right now to hopefully give some wisdom on these topics. If you have not seen the first video where I try to explain what yoga philosophy is in a broader sense, take a look at that. This video is about the style of writing and the different topics that yoga philosophy, if you will, versus the biblical texts, how they connect and what they look like. Maybe if you are a Christian, you might know the Bible, you might know the stories and the way the Psalm is written, the Proverbs and all of these things. But then what about yoga philosophy and these books? First of all, the early yoga philosophy that we find in the Vedic texts and the Upanishads, the Vedic texts are, if you read it more like the Psalms in the Bible, they are mainly used at that time, we think, the scholars think, used as prayers and songs when the people, Indian people at that time, were making offerings and worshipping God. And that's the style of writing. Now, if you go to the Upanishads, text written 3 to 5, 6, 700 before Christ, there are more stories in these. So it's not one story like we might know from the Old Testament, where it has like a chronology in it. There we have Adam and Eve, we have Noah, we have Abraham, we have Moses or Joseph, Moses. We have all this history lined out. If you look at yoga philosophy, especially in the Upanishads, it's more stories of heroes fighting different people, fighting maybe mystical creatures, sages talking, having discussions about different things. So different style. Now the main topics in both, if you will, the Veda and the Upanishads are topics on what is life, what is the right way of acting, the duty, the right moral in life. So you might think it's crazy worship of God, but actually it's really, really nice thoughts about how do we avoid suffering? How do we live a life that is pleasing to whatever is out there and to please the gods and have this healthy life and get the food that we need, all of that. And are these topics things that we know from the Bible? Sure. I mean, there are lots of stories in the Old Testament, especially in the Psalms and the Proverbs, about wisdom, about what is the right way of living. How do I please God? How am I becoming a great person? Why is it that evil people have a good life and I do good and I have pain? All these suffering questions, they are the same. So there are what I call it existential questions that passes through both these kinds of writings. Now, as we move on into maybe more of the Yoga Sutras that are written about 300-400 after Christ, we become more aware of what yoga is and how to use yoga. And here we find, of course, a difference between the biblical text and these. And the more we go into also Hatha Yoga, as I talked about in the first video, these thoughts of strains and philosophies in these, I think the difference become more obvious. I'm going to talk about the difference in another video, but I think you can see the difference more. These are ways or rules, if you will, or advices on how to live a good life. And that is also what we find here. Also questions about what happens in the afterlife. Now, of course, all these things, old ways of thinking, have been transformed, translated into our culture, into our time and age. And a lot of it has become what I call self-development thoughts. So yoga philosophy today is not, if you think about how a person would live 2,000-3,000 years ago without computers, without cars, airplanes, all of these things that we call the modern Western life, their questions, their thoughts, of course, were different in one way than what it is today. So we have taken these things, interpreted into what makes sense today. How does detachment, it's a common thread in Bhagavad Gita, for example, how does detachment become helpful today? Forgiveness, how does that become helpful today? So a lot of things have been turned into self-development that I can learn about myself, put up boundaries, and hopefully become a better person. That's my take on the literature, if you will, on yoga philosophy and the Bible. Now, in yoga philosophy, of course, there are multiple books, multiple schools, Bible. I wouldn't call it multiple schools as such. There are multiple churches and directions, but we all look at one book that consists of several books, right? But this is the one and only. We don't have a lot of different things. So, of course, that's a difference in that way. Yeah, I hope this was inspiring. If you want to know more, you can buy this at Amazon, Learning CrossYoga. Here I get way more into depth with yoga philosophy, theology, yoga history, and all of these things. So give this video a big thumbs up, like it, share it, and follow along in the next video where I'm gonna talk a little bit more about what the main differences between yoga philosophy and Christian faith is. And I'm not gonna point my finger, I'm just gonna share my thoughts.